Folks, we'll get started in just a few minutes. I realized I hadn't unmuted myself. What a perfect way to get this started, right? Forgetting that trick, mute and unmute. Folks are filing in right now, so we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Folks, we're going to start in just one more minute. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Allison Campbell, and I'm the Heritage Outreach Manager here at the Washington State Historical Society. This session, Contested River, Native Immigrant and Industrial Claims to the Duwamish, is actually kicking off our conference today. We've got 4 days ahead of us, and as a result, we're kind of Zoom webinar newbies, so we hope you'll be a little bit patient with us. By Friday, we'll be experts at this. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Washington State Historical Society is located on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We pay respect to their elders, past and present. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where you all are joining us from today, from across the Northwest and beyond. A few words about our platform and format. We are using Zoom webinar, and you will see and hear our presenters, but they cannot see and hear you, and you can't see and hear each other. We do want to know who you are, so please take a minute and introduce yourself and tell us where you are coming from in the chat box. And definitely, if you have any technology hiccups throughout the panel, you can drop those in the chat box. We do, however, ask that all of your questions for our panelists be put into the Q&A box. So towards the end of the program, I'll share your questions with the presenters, but keep in mind, I won't be monitoring that chat box for questions. So if you want the panelists to be asked your question, make sure it goes in that Q&A box, and you should see that there at the bottom of your screen. Also, we are recording this session, and those recordings will be available to conference registrants until November 23rd on our unlisted YouTube channel. So at the completion of the conference, you'll receive the links to access all of those recordings. And with that, I'd like to introduce BJ Cummings, who's moderating today's session, and will introduce our panelists. BJ is author of The River That Made Seattle, A Natural and Human History of the Duwamish, which came out in July of this year on University of Washington Press. Cummings is a Seattle-based writer, storyteller, and filmmaker whose work focuses on the intersection of environmental and social justice. Previous works include Dam the Rivers, Dam the People, Development and Resistance in Amazonian Brazil, and the documentary film Eco Sanctuary Belize. Cummings founded the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition in 2001 and has worked with the river's residents, tribal fishing, and business communities for 25 years. Cummings currently manages community engagement for the University of Washington's Superfund Research Program. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, BJ.
Great, thank you so much, Allison. I'll just jump right in. So we're here today to talk about the history of the Duwamish River, which has been subject to 2 centuries of competing claims by native tribes, early settlers, industrial pioneers, and waves of immigrant communities taking up residence along its banks. The outcome of these conflicts has literally shaped the very course of the river itself, the fate of its communities, and the character of the city of Seattle. Here in green Seattle, we've built the wealth of our city by colonizing the tide flats that once supported millions of salmon, converting those tide flats into the industrial lands that have allowed Seattle's settler society to flourish. The city we see today has been both blessed by that decision and, in a sense, cursed by it as we've struggled with the dispossession and breakdown of the river's human and natural resources and the resulting expenses of that. Today, the Duwamish River is polluted, its neighborhoods in poor health, and its industrial base struggling. But plans for cleanup and for revitalization are underway, largely led by a new generation of pioneers, many of whom reimagine the Duwamish as what they like to call a river for all. So I've invited today's panelists to explore the history and the future of the Duwamish River through their varied lenses. And they include a 3rd-generation Duwamish Tribal Council member, 1st-generation immigrant and current director of the advocacy group, Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, and the manager of operations for a cement plant on the Duwamish Waterway. All 3 are involved in collaborative efforts today to help guide a Superfund cleanup of the Duwamish River that meets the needs of all of its constituents. So before introducing them, I'd like to give us a little more context by reading an excerpt from The River That Made Seattle, and then I'll turn it over to our panelists. The story of the Duwamish River and the experiences of its people, native, immigrant, and industrialist, is largely missing from the popular history of Seattle. The changes to the watershed began with the very first white immigrants to the area that is now known as Seattle, the Maples, Van Asselt, and Collins families. Since this pioneering family, or this pioneering party, first settled on the Duwamish River, alliances and conflicts between and among Native peoples, immigrant residents, and local and global industrialists have transformed the watershed's natural resources, its economy, and all of its communities. The city of Seattle grew from the rich resources of the river's tide flats, from the monumental feats of its early industrial barons, and from the persistence of generations of Native and immigrant residents. But this growth came at a high cost. Only 70 years after the first colonists settled on the Duwamish River, its watershed had been reduced to less than 1/4 of its original size, and only the waters of the Green River still flowed freely to the Duwamish. The White, Black, and Cedar rivers, all once part of the watershed, had been diverted to bypass the Duwamish or had dried up entirely. The waters of the freshwater lakes that these rivers fed and drained were forced through newly engineered routes. The native people who lived by the changed rivers had been similarly diverted to reservations, relegated to shanty towns, integrated into settler society through marriage, or eliminated through disease and warfare. As an engineering feat, the Duwamish transformation was remarkable. The dramatic alterations to the watershed and the river itself allowed for the birth of a thriving industrial city. Business boomed. Immigrants flocked to the growing metropolis from all corners of the world. From the banks of the Duwamish, a city was born. And there, the story we tell ourselves about the making of Seattle typically ends. But we've neglected to pursue important questions about who and what we became. What happened to the people who were in the path of this progress? Where are the surviving families of the Duwamish tribe today? Who are the descendants of the first immigrants to settle on the river? And who's taken their place? And what has become of the waterfront businesses founded by Seattle's industrial pioneers? A century and a half after Chief Seattle escorted the first pioneer families upriver, many of these people have come together in a bid to reclaim Seattle's river. Whether they will succeed depends on many factors, one of which is whether they can agree on an answer to the question that has been debated for decades. Whose river is it? With that, I'd like to introduce the first of our panelists. James Rasmussen is a member of the Duwamish Tribe who can trace his family back to Cruscanum, a signer of the Treaty of Point Elliott. His family has served on the modern Duwamish Tribal Council for 4 generations and are the descendants of both this region's native people and its settlers. He currently is the Superfund Program Manager at the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, and he serves on the Duwamish Roundtable, an EPA collective advising the river cleanup. James?
Thank you very much, BJ. And I would also like to thank Allison for putting this together, highlighting such an important issue. The Duwamish River is the only river in the city of Seattle. It is an estuary. And when we say that, that's where saltwater and freshwater meet. That is incredibly important as far as wildlife is concerned in our region. As most of you should know, we are dealing with at least problem with our salmon populations. When we go back to the early 1900s, we used to have a salmon run every month. Unfortunately, today, we don't have that. And that's because of the changes that have been made. What I want to make sure people understand is that when we made the changes to the river, and I say we, this was done in the early 1900s, to be able to make property available in the Duwamish Valley that wouldn't flood, and also to be able to make opportunities for people. It is important to remember what we sacrificed to be able to do that. When we talk about the Duwamish River today, it is an industrial area. And it is not only an industrial area, it is still the most important habitat that we have in the city of Seattle. That we have more variety of wildlife in the Duwamish Valley than anywhere else in Seattle. Magnuson Park, Arboretum, it doesn't matter. And that's because it is the intertidal habitat where wildlife are drawn to. So as we move forward with the cleanup that is going on, the Duwamish River is a Superfund cleanup that we actually think about the leadership that was shown in creating the industrial area in the first place, as well as today. How can we make the Duwamish River a river for all? To me, that is incredibly important. We don't want to move industries out. We want them to be cleaner. We want communities that have survived there and have fostered immigrant communities for generations to still do so. But also, and I'll say it in this way, my cousins, aunties, and uncles, the heron, the otter, flounder, and what we used to call mud puppies, the salamander, are all part of my family because they were here when we were here. When we talk about this estuary and the opportunities that we have, steps are being made to make it better and better and better. But the hard part is what's coming next. How clean can we make it? We have an opportunity to get close. It's never going to be what it once was in the 1850s. But it will be much better than it has been. I look forward to that. And I look forward to the opportunity to be able to say that this is a river for all. For my grandfather, my mother, and me. 3 generations of my family that I know have cared deeply about this area. I ask you to help us do that. We are not trying to put industries out of business. We won't do that. We want industries to be cleaner, which, quite honestly, makes them more profitable. We've seen that more often than not. And when we talk about a river for all, we're talking about is the opportunity that we have not only to save the salmon and the Duwamish which is amazing that we still have a run of wild salmon in the Duwamish River, but also the orcas in Puget Sound. And all of the wildlife. If we're cleaner in the Duwamish, we've shown leadership. And that is what we need to do today. We showed leadership in creating an industrial area. Now we need to show leadership in balancing all of that. So we do not want to see one industry go out of business when we talk about the cleanup of the river. What we want to see is to the industries to thrive, the communities to thrive, and for the wildlife to thrive. And we're on that path. We are starting there. And it is actually a wonderful thing to be able to see. I started over, 35 years ago in my work on the Duwamish, and it's almost unrecognizable today. So I have hope for the future. Things are going to be better. But there's so many layers of history that is very much part of what made Seattle. The Duwamish River, on the back of that river, is what made the wealth of this city. And we all appreciate that. But today is the day that we can ask, can we do better? And we can. And so with that, thank you so much for the opportunity, BJ, and Allison as well. But I want to make sure you all understand the story is an important story, not just because I'm in it, yeah, fine, okay, but because of all the other stories that are in it. It doesn't look at it in one way. It looks at it in many ways. And because I've been involved with the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition for years, we've always wanted to look at things in as many ways as possible. The DRCC is the Community Advisor Group, DEPA. We are also the Technical Advisor Group to the community. We are communicating back and forth. And quite honestly, Paulina will probably talk about this. We've pivoted to take care of the community during COVID and other issues that have come up that are really important to the community. We are a community-based organization. The community knows this place and knows this river. And I probably went on way too long, and I'm sorry, but I love this place. The river is alive. It is part of my family. So please respect that.
Thank you very much, James. You did not go over time, just for the record. I would like next to introduce Jonathan Hall. Jonathan is the manager of the LaFarge Duwamish Waterway Cement Plant, a one-time lobsterman. He was born in Maine and has lived all over this country and a few places outside of it as well. Jonathan has been in Seattle for the past 10 years now, and he also serves on EPA's Duwamish Roundtable, advising the river cleanup. So, Jonathan, please.
Hey, BJ. Thanks for the introduction, and a big thank you for the invite. It is going to be a cool new experience for me participating in these things. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, perfect. The screen froze on me. So when I contemplated your invite and the things to talk about, there are three things that struck me as appropriate in the context of this conference and the theme of your book. The first is as has been pointed out, the Duwamish River's longstanding role for Metro Seattle in the infrastructure of really everything that we do, from the roadways to the buildings and whatnot, linked to concrete. And of course, concrete is near and dear to my heart, as it's a part of the industry that I am in. I'm part of the cement industry. All four of the major cement suppliers in I'm going to say Washington State, certainly the Metro Seattle area, have significant facilities on the Duwamish River and have had for many years. So if you think about the bridges, the sidewalks, the roads, the sewer systems, all having a component of concrete, it's extremely likely that from Bellevue back to downtown Seattle and a good bit north and south, that concrete was made with cement that was either manufactured or brought to this area on the Duwamish River, making the Duwamish River an incredibly key part of so much of what we know in ways that you may not know. The second thought that I had in this theme is the Duwamish River's, I'm going to call it safe port status, for a lot of the construction equipment working on the various different marine assets, from the waterfront docks of downtown Seattle to the boat yards, to the industrial ports, bringing in so much of what the Pacific Northwest uses through the container ports. A lot of that equipment is based here in the Duwamish River, and you can imagine a lot of it's not built for heavy water, and so the safe status that this river provides for that equipment is critical for companies like Orion, American Construction, Manson, Pacific Pile. All of these guys have used this river as a key, one of the key bases for operations in the work that they do. The last thing that struck me as worth noting here is how closely intertwined the Duwamish River is for industrial scale recycling efforts that happen in the region. So as an example, at Terminal 105, steel recycling with Nucor. Of course, here at the facility I lead, recycling, manufacturing a recycled cementitious product. So 100% of what we make here in this facility is made as a recycled product. Seattle Iron Metals, staking steel, Ash Grove, alternate raw materials and alternate fuel programs that are a key part of recycling. Certainteed wallboard, recycling gypsum and gypsum wallboard. There's RDOC and SMI recycling glass from Washington State, and even bits a bit further than that. And then Cal Portland Stoneway, both doing high levels of recycling of the filter cake that comes back from loads. So if you were to take the combined impact of all of that recycling, you would find an incredible benefit to not just the Seattle area, but really to the whole Pacific Northwest. So all three kind of, for me, interesting aspects on how important this waterway is from an industrial perspective. And personally, James, I share your view of a waterway for all, and continue to look forward to working on ways to make sure that is a reality. I'm guessing I didn't use my full time there, BJ, but
That's fine. We'll pull you in during Q&A for sure.
okay.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Okay, so finally, I would like to introduce Paulina Lopez. Paulina is a first-generation immigrant to the U.S. She's raising her family in the Duwamish Valley neighborhood of South Park. Originally from Ecuador, she has a master's in human rights law and began volunteering with the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition in about 2012, I believe. She is now the organization's executive director, overseeing all of the group's environmental justice and health advocacy efforts in the Duwamish Valley. So please join me in welcoming Paulina.
Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be here, BJ. Always, I'm very grateful for your book, for telling the real story. To my colleague, James Rasmussen, and you, my respects, that I have always relied so much on your knowledge and wisdom. And Allison, for inviting us today to be part of this webinar. Thank you, and for you all who are attending. I've been reading the chat, and it's great to hear that we have representation from many parts of Washington and even outside of Washington. The Duwamish River. So I wanted to first, before I move a little bit further into commenting on what my colleagues have been saying, the reason why I started to get involved with the Duwamish was, as BJ said, I come from South America, and growing up, I have always been close to the rivers. We have a great Amazon River there, where I spent a lot of my time as a child. And so when I moved here to live in the United States, I was looking for a place where I can raise my family around some culture and have some cultural anchorage. And so, of course, we moved to a neighborhood called South Park. And South Park is one of the neighborhoods where we share this Superfund site. Georgetown and South Park are the two neighborhoods. So I've been in the neighborhood for the past 15 years, and the river was one of our main reasons why I really fell in love immediately to come and grow a family here. I have always enjoyed the nature. I have always enjoyed the waters coming close to where you live, so you can give respect to the habitat that brings along. And I wanted to also, for my kids, that have some respect for water and have some respect for our estuary that is the river. So not long after I moved, I realized how much it was needed to be involved. And that brought me to the organization. I started to volunteer for the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, where now I am the executive director. So my journey started actually about 8 years ago with the organization, when I realized how important our voices for the community that we live here in South Park in Georgetown, where we call it the Duwamish Valley. I realized immediately the intentional efforts that this organization was bringing in community voice for something that was impacting us directly. So I wanted to make sure I am supporting my community, my Latinx community, with language access, with enough support materials, and very grateful for the organization who saw the need and the intention for that. Immediately after I started to volunteer, I also got engaged in the knowledge. I have really been trying to understand how, as a community-based organization, was the only organization that had the role of serving as a technical advisor to community. So I started learning, and that has been doing. Most importantly, bringing that voices of those who are not representing with big decisions impacting us directly. But we couldn't do that unless community is very well aware of what is going on, educating them and responding questions that they have in something that impact us directly, right? So the health, we still have so many people that are fishing on the Duwamish. Many of them, majority of them, are from the immigrant refugee community. So that has been one of our priorities. How can we get the the right information of what's happening on the river for them to make informed decisions, as we have been looking into the information about salmon, and James referred to it, that is the safest fish to eat from there. But we also wanted to create this good empowered community that could be part of the decisions, and that's had been the work highlighting in our organization. How can EPA, as they bring along, how the responsible parties create a mechanism for us to understand where the community is at, and if they can vocalize a better cleanup that is going to benefit everyone, then that's what we want to push for. And we have been creative in the ways we engage, because it's not the same. Right now, we're all using the technology because of the pandemic, but usually our ways is going to community, not asking community to come to us. So we are attending there to karaoke sessions, to talk about the cleanup, to talk about the community. We're there having tea time with the Somali community and understanding what the needs are, and also understanding where more information we can bring. We are right there with community designing Lego exercises that explain well what exactly is the cleanup methods that we're thinking. What does dredging means and natural recovery? Those are things that, when you are not in the day to day, you don't, even if when you translate it, it doesn't make any sense unless you have an explanation and you can truly bring those voices back into bringing the best that you can do for your health. So that's what we have been giving a huge emphasis on the community that we represent. Talking about growing in this empowerment and community capacity, we have also been working tirelessly to bring the youth voices. We have a very big youth population here in South Park, mostly specifically the largest children per capita of the city of Seattle. So how can we incorporate this not only for the education, but the advocacy, and give the youth the information they need, because they will be representing us. And our dream together with them is that they will be able to enjoy fully a river that is right there. Like one of our youth said, it is very hard to just see it. It's like having a piece of chocolate, but you cannot eat. Given the analogy is like, we have our river here, looks beautiful, but we cannot fully enjoy it because we know it's polluted. We know that we can't eat the fish. We know that we can't swim. So that's, for us, was we take it to order, and we are really informing a new generation of hoping that they will be the ones enjoying this river when it gets clean. Also because as we have here, Jonathan representing some of the industries, we understand the industries are also part of the community, and we need to work closer together. As James was saying, we don't want to shut off the industries. They also bring economic vitality But we want to work alongside with them, and we want to make sure that they understand where community residents are, open jobs, local jobs for us, for our youth, provide the trainings that they need, do good environmentally, and bring good allies to bring that economic vitality and also environmentally healthy practices that cannot continue to damage our community. So we have also been emphasizing that as part of our work, and we are responding to the needs, because ideally we want a community that it's not having these huge health disparities that it's being shown. South Park, for example, together with a neighborhood that is within 7 to 8 miles from here, has 13 years of life discrepancy between this and the other neighborhood right here in Seattle. So that's what our work is all about. How can we focus our attention on improving the health of our communities? How can we provide those voices that are needed and bring not only like the health, but the economic vitality and the good environmental practices that we all are going to be able to accomplish by working together. One of the things that, our organization was created mostly to be the organization overseeing the Superfund site, but our mission has also been evolving into something bigger that we need to pay attention responding to community, and that is the other environmental injustices that happen, and how do we address them? How do we address air pollution with it? How do we address displacement and gentrification? How do we address the lack of food security in the neighborhood? So we have been supporting efforts in the community, specifically that speak to climate justice, and that is bringing the right people, the right stakeholders that are making decisions into thinking of the Duwamish Valley of a priority place to make these improvements. But as we are making these improvements, also making sure that our community gets to stay where they live, gets to enjoy all these different years that they have had environmental burdens. But how about if we have better parks now? We don't have good parks, but once we bring that, and we have been working as an organization with community on that, how can we make sure that they stay to enjoy a clean river, that they get to still and enjoy a good park, clean air? So it's an everyday challenge, but I think we're getting closer, and that has been a wonderful opportunity to realize the good partnerships among other. And we still need, all the allies that we can to be able to make this happen, because we do envision a river for all, but also we are envisioning a Duwamish Valley that is clean, that is safe for everyone as well. Before I adjourn, I wanted to, if you would like more information to know in our organization, I wanted to share with you our website. Is the duwamishcleanup.org, and it looks like this. It talks about all the efforts that we're doing as we are seeing it at one river, one community, one home. And because mostly we have been working to have a voice for our community, advocating, promoting, and empowered the Duwamish Valley. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paulina. Great. What I'd like to do next is actually, I have one question for each of you to just kind of seed the Q&A portion of this event, and we also want to invite other people to post their questions in the Q&A box. But to get things rolling, Jonathan, I think I'll start with you. I personally found it really fascinating tracing the changing face of industries on the river as I researched the river that made Seattle. So I'm wondering if you'd be able to share a little bit of how the land that the LaFarge plant sits on has changed since the river channeling began. and what you think the future of that same piece of land might be, because it's been a work in progress.
Yeah, so my understanding about the history doesn't go back super far, but the area that this property is currently occupying was at one point one of the first airfields, as I understand it, for this area. So before the Boeing field was constructed, there was an airmail business that operated out of here, and there's actually a monument at the entrance to the plant, at least to the entrance to the main building here to that. I understand Boeing also had a bunch of float planes in their early days that operated out of this area. And then so that's probably not that far back compared to the work that you've done in understanding the much longer history. In terms of the future, I think as we've talked about, the facility here has gone through some quite a few changes in the context of what we do here. We used to operate a cement kiln that no longer does run here, and so that gave us an opportunity to look at what else can we do with the assets that are here and the people that are here, and creating jobs. And we've been able to come up with quite a few different opportunities to remain a vibrant business, including, as you know, participating in the Duwamish cleanup. 75% roughly of the early action areas for the Duwamish River we were involved in some way or another. But we've also been doing some cool stuff with gypsum for agricultural purposes, and of course still making a cementitious product that's quite green. And I think at least for the next 10 years, I think I'm hoping that we'll continue to do that kind of stuff, because I'm not quite ready to retire. And then after that, I don't know. Things continue to change.
So just as kind of a follow-up, for folks who don't know, when you say you've been involved in the river cleanup, you mean, if you would explain what you mean about that, because you've kind of described your role, or LaFarge's role, as kind of a yin and yang, being both a liable party responsible for some of the pollution and cleanup, and also having new business as a result of the cleanup flowing through your plant. Can you elaborate a little bit?
I'll try. You got a good summary there. This facility has been on the river since 62, 63, with a cement kiln in 68, and as such get the status of a potential responsible party, PRP status, and going through the conversations about what does that mean in terms of how we should be involved in the cleanup. And we'll undoubtedly have a level of continued involvement in that for some time to come. On the other side of that, as we looked around us for opportunities to do other things that created value for the people and the business here, we found that we had a lot of the infrastructure, permits, and assets, and people to transload the material, the contaminated mud that would get dredged out of the early action areas, and help get it moved on to subtile D landfills. And that's been a big part of what we've done for the last 8 or 9 years of the 10 years that I've been here.
Great, and I understand you were able to bring back a whole crew that you had to lay off for a while once that started.
Yeah,
that's great.
We've been able to keep some businesses and some people going.
Yeah. Okay, so James, I also wanted to ask you, how does restoration of habitat for salmon fit into a river for all in your view, especially given how developed the river is today? Does that need to displace industrial lands or residential areas? Where is it going to go?
Not at all to displace industrial land. What we're talking about is the opportunities that we have with the Superfund cleanup. Along with Superfund comes a natural resource damage assessment, or which is referred to as NERDA. That is actually run, who is it run by, BJ? Tell me.
NOAA? Is that
NOAA. Thank you. I'm sorry.
National Oceanic?
My head. It's run by NOAA, and they have a group of people that approve and give points for replacing the damage that has been done. And habitat restoration in the Duwamish has been some of the most difficult to do. Number one, because it is some of the most expensive property to do anything on, but also because you still have active businesses. So you can't cut into those businesses. Now, prior to the Superfund site, we were able to make some inroads, and there are some wonderful inroads. The habitat site at T107 is saving a place that was the last actual bend in the river that is still there. And when you look at it as far as a habitat site, it is one of the most important on the river because we're not replacing anything. We're saving something. And it's always better to do that. And amazing that we were able to do that on the river because of an archaeological site that was on the property at T107. I look at it as my ancestors actually reached up and said, no, we're not going to let this happen. We won't let the development happen here. We won't let a terminal be built here. And because of that, we still have some of the original habitat on the Duwamish River. Now, 98% of it is gone. But with what's happening with the Boeing company, with the city in some ways, and especially with the Port of Seattle, with their habitat site that they're going to put on T117, we are looking at more habitat than anybody could have ever dreamed of on the Duwamish. And right now we're holding our own. In other words, we're not improving salmon runs, but we're not losing them. And when you try to recover salmon, it's just not one species. You can't look at it as one species. You have to look at it as a multi-species approach. And what we have seen is an increase of wildlife in the Duwamish Valley now that is better than any other place in the city of Seattle. And by saying so, it is not an amazing feat. We are the estuary. That's where wildlife come. And by increasing all of the wildlife, you know, from the herons to the eagles to the otters, all of those are coming back. And that means that salmon will come back as well. So when I look at salmon recovery, the estuary in the Duwamish River is key and actually weighted as far as salmon recovery is concerned in the Duwamish, that it is more important to recover habitat there, because that's where salmon feed as they're going back up the river. Once they transfer to fresh water, they don't eat anymore. As fry come down the river, or the tiny salmon, this is where they start to eat. And this is where the opportunity to recover those runs are. Think about it. Think about we are one of the only wild salmon runs in Puget Sound, which is amazing. But it is also, for me, as a Duwamish person, as a Duwamish Indian, Duwamish people have survived as well. And with our Longhouse and Cultural Center, which I hope everybody gets a chance to see, we are thriving better now. And the opportunity that we have with restoring the river, I believe also is very much part of restoring the Duwamish Tribe.
Okay.
And that will make things much different on the river, as well as for the city, and as well for the morals of everybody around us, that we've done the right thing.
Thank you, James. I see that Allison has added both the link to Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition and the Duwamish Tribe in the chat, by the way. Paulina, I have one question I would also like to toss to you before we go to the audience. In the past almost hour here, we've heard about the river as family, the river as infrastructure, the river as a cultural anchor, and as a source of food, among others. When we think about the question, whose river is it? It's clear that each of the voices we've heard from today feel a sense of ownership, but for each of them, the meaning of that place is also different. Given the past 2 centuries of conflict, I'm curious what you see as the path to a shared river. What is the next practical step in actually creating that future river for all?
Thank you for that question, BJ. I think you're right. The Duwamish River belongs to everyone, and we all have different levels of ownership. And we want to make sure that first we honor our first people of Seattle, that what the name was after. As we are moving forward, I think it wouldn't be possible to have a river for all if we don't have the people, the right stakeholders doing what we need to do, right? So for us, it's really important as community to care for it. As community, how do we maintain, how do we steward our river, and how do we, as the community around it, do good practices for our river and learn the history. And this is why it's so important that we have actually books like you highlighting the real history of the river for our youth, for our community live here. For the industries, I think our river has taken so much. Many of the economic development has been developed here in our community, right on the arms, on the shores of the river. But we haven't seen this economic benefit yet back into the community that has been sustaining this river. So we want to make sure that we're working together towards first acknowledging how much damage we have done to the river, how much damage we have created, how much we can be doing under the reparation together moving forward will be the importance of creating better environmental standards, creating better stewardship, and visioning for that comes from the community where it lives, and leaving it to the legacy for our children, our youth, and making sure that if you want to fish, if you want to swim, if you want to work, then this is for you because you work for it. And that's what we're trying to do and accomplish.
Great, thank you very much. I want to make sure we leave time for the audience to ask questions. Allison, do we have any questions on deck?
We do. We just got a question here that I'll read out loud. I'm curious about the immigrant experience in the Duwamish Valley. My grandmother lived in the South Park area during the 1920s when there was a large Italian population. What would the panel say are the biggest similarities and biggest differences between these groups' relationships to the Duwamish River?
Great, and I'll also invite James and Jonathan to go ahead and turn their cameras on, so we're taking group questions now.
I'll be first to start. And the story I will tell is how the Boeing Company actually got its start, which, and unless you live in the Duwamish Valley and have talked to the people there, you won't really know. An Italian immigrant farmer was somebody who wanted to see industry developed in the valley because it would help his community. And so for Bill Boeing, he bought the property that he started his company on for $1. That's how the Boeing Company started. And this is not a story Boeing tells at all, but it is the truth. We know it is. So the importance of the immigrant farmers, starting with Italians, then moving to Asian, then moving to Hispanic, were important to develop things like the Pike Place Market, because that's where those vegetables came from to feed the city of Seattle. So this has been a cooperation between the community and between the city to develop this industrial area. But somewhere along the lines, it became imbalanced. And that's the story we tell today. How do we balance it back again?
Yeah, I think James covered it all, and how for sure we acknowledge all the different generations of immigrants, to the point, it's been here. South Park specifically, the neighborhood was one small town of Italian and Japanese farmers, and which is what James was referring to. And it just annexed to the city of Seattle in 1851, which is, it was starting to be acknowledging all the immigrant farmers that we had around the 21st centuries. And now we don't only have the Latinx community, Hispanic, but we have a big wave of recent immigrants from Vietnam, from Somalia, from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and also a big Khmer population from Cambodia. I mentioned these when I was speaking to, we get to the communities the way that we need to in order for them to get involved in the community development work that we're doing in the river cleanup. And that it has made it extremely delightful to be knowledgeable and learning from different cultures, different languages. I know it's challenging sometimes because we translate materials in different languages. It takes double work, triple work. But once you see, you know, more of the community that live here involved, that's what really our community work is all about.
Jonathan, as one of the most recent arrivals, did you want to the Duwamish Valley, to Seattle, did you want to add anything?
Well, I'm not sure I'm not sure I'm really familiar with the Italian community and then the more recent community, so probably not the right one to comment on that.
One of the things that really strikes me, both in terms of my research for the book, but also with the work I do today, with the University Superfund Research Program and our community partners like Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, is one of the commonalities that so many people have, regardless of where in the world they have come from, whether they are native, recent immigrant, what part of the world they're from, is how many different cultures fish the Duwamish, both for sustenance, right, for food, and also just because of the anchor that it provides them, either to their history here or to their history somewhere else that they are replicating here on the river. So one of the biggest commonalities I have that I think took many decades too long for everybody to kind of understand and realize, as far as planning for cleanup of the river, is how many fishing cultures use this place in common.
Great, BJ, we have another question. This is from Sarah. The DRCC is such an amazing model of collaboration and advocacy. Thank you for all your work. Can you speak to how DRCC was founded and came to embrace this model? Are there other organizations doing similar work that have inspired the DRCC?
Thank you for that question and for the compliments. Yes, so we are a coalition of organizations. So we represent many others, but we also are part of other people of color-led organizations like Front and Center. And we work aligned. You know, we are a small organization, but what we do well is our community engagement, our community reach out. So we have been working hard with other partners to make sure that we bring in the expertise needed, the technical support that we need in order for us to bring the information. So I do appreciate the questions, and thanks, Allison, for putting our website. I hope that we can get connected with people that would like to hear more about our efforts.
I also would like to chime in because BJ, being the first coordinator for DRCC, can probably also talk about this. But I want to make sure people understand that it's not just here in the Duwamish. When we look at the Chesapeake, that estuary is something that needs to be recovered. Florida, in its many habitats that are under attack, they need to be recovered. And the Hudson River in New York City, which is something that is ahead of us in the process, and they've found mistakes that they have done. And we don't want to repeat those mistakes. We want to do a good job. And I would actually ask Jonathan to take a look at some of those issues, that we don't make those mistakes as we move forward, that we do a better job than they did in the Hudson, because they made mistakes. And we have that opportunity now. We are in that process now to be able to do the best job that we can.
I look forward to hanging out with you here soon, James, maybe virtually, and learning a bit more about what you're talking about exactly. I have some level of familiarity with several of those, but Don't want to infer anything on your behalf. I want to make sure I understand what you're thinking about specifically.
So are there any other questions from our audience that you'd like to type in that Q&A, or any other questions that BJ has that you'd like to direct to our panelists?
I would like, if there aren't more questions from the audience, or maybe until there are, I think I would just like to invite our panelists to enter into conversation with each other. Do you have questions for each other? Are there conversations you want to engage each other in?
I have a question for you, BJ.
Okay.
I would love to hear your inspiration for the book.
So unquestionably, part of my inspiration for writing this was, my own experience working on the river and with river communities over the course of about 20 years. And so many stories, stories like yours, why did you come here? And who are you? Who are your family? And why do you feel such a connection, to this place, this new chosen home, to the stories from families like James, who have, he can trace his family back by name for 7 generations, but they've been here for, millennia. And just, every single time I went out on the river with new people, which happened weekly, monthly, I myself was learning something new about the river. And even after 20 years, when I, finally sat down to try to capture, honestly, some of the myths that Seattle in general believes about this river, and to try to set the record straight on some of that, and to try to answer the basic question of, where is the Duwamish? Do we have a river? All of those were part of it. But really what it came down to more than anything else, what sustained me through actually getting it done, was these really disparate human stories about what this river means to different people. Which is also why I wanted all of you here, today to talk a little bit about that. And after 20 years, when I first sat down to write this, at that point, people would always refer, journalists, conference organizers, whoever to me to talk about the river, because I was supposedly, the expert on the Duwamish, which was ridiculous. But the depth of that, of that absurdity is what I learned through writing the book, how little I knew after 20 years of working out here daily. So it's just a really rich, complex, kind of endless series of adventures and rabbit holes. And the fact that so many people in Seattle don't know its history, don't know its significance to the city, and in some cases don't even know that Seattle has a river, that this place exists, is something I wanted to do, some small bit to fix, because I think that understanding this river, its past and its present, enriches this city in ways that just are indescribable.
BJ, I'd love to continue on the theme of asking you questions. So if I may, I'm always intrigued with the unexpected. And so in that context, I know that you've interviewed and spoken with a whole lot of people as you put together this book. Can you talk a little bit about what were some of the most unexpected conversations that you had, or things that just surprised you about either the people that you met or the bits of history that caught you off guard?
Well, there were many. I think, though, one of my favorites, I will call it a favorite as opposed to the most unexpected, but one of my favorite surprises had to do with many generations ago, 5, 6 generations ago. Something I learned about James's family and realized was, not limited to his family, but within a generation of settlers actually living here, and I'm not talking about the longer history of trading, British using this as trading routes, but mostly American settlers claiming land here and putting down roots. Within a generation of that, or even in the first generation of that, in some cases, many of the Native women specifically, particularly those who have chose the path of integration. And I mentioned earlier, there were many different paths that people took, but some took the path of integration. And among many women, that took the form of marrying settlers, very much in the same way that different Native groups would often intermarry, between themselves and people from distant areas, and kind of access to resources that way. That continued with the settlers arriving. And that is not to say that all of those marriages were voluntary, but there absolutely were ones, including in James's family, that were. And many of those women became the ones who really started to master the new systems, the legal systems, land systems, ways that the new structures worked. And a class of, I'll just call them women land barons, Native women land barons emerged, which is nothing you ever hear about in any history anywhere in this country. And I would actually be fascinated to learn how many other places that may have been true, but it was certainly true here. It was because of James's maternal ancestors that he still lives on land that his great grandmother settled with her settler, her white husband at the time, and then she brought the rest of her family, his family, back from the various places that they had been scattered to shortly after settlement here, because she mastered the whole system of new system of land ownership that was introduced here, and it wouldn't have happened without the grandmothers in that family.
Yeah, it is a neat story. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, maybe my turn. I don't think I'm going to ask BJ a question, but
Good.
I want to make sure that everybody understands. What you're looking at are generations of people that have been trying to do the right thing. I met BJ 15 years after I started working on the Duwamish River as this wonderful blonde woman that was coming up the river in a pilot boat. And me and John Beal, B-E-A-L.
I'm gonna mute you, James.
No, you're not. And the reason I spell out his name is because you should Google it and find out more about him, because it's on his shoulders that we all stand on. And then working with Paulina as a volunteer at first, and with her passion and her intelligence, knowing that she was the future of our organization. I was director for 8 years, and Paulina is my the person who has taken over from me, and I was the one that recommended that because she is so good. And also to Jonathan, you took me on a tour of your plant. Now, it took me a while to find your office in the, the hallways that are LaFarge.
I remember finding you in the back hallway.
Exactly. But you explained everything that was going on so well, and you were so upfront about what was going on. And each one of these are partnerships for the community, for DRCC, and most importantly, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and the Department of Ecology. They're all our partners. And that's what we look at them as well as responsible parties. It's not them against us. We don't ever look at it that way. We look at them as partners. How do we get this done? How can we make it be the best cleanup that we can? That is what we're looking at. To make, it's never going to be what it was 150 years ago, but it's going to be better. And I think that's something we all look forward to. And if you haven't ever been to the Duwamish Valley, please come and visit. Winter is a wonderful time to visit, but summertime is maybe even better because you can go to a park off of West Marginal Way that is a beautiful park that you might only find 5 or 10 people in, as opposed to some of the cramped parks that we all go to. It is a beautiful place to come. And it's a beautiful place because it's a real place. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that the river is alive. It is part of us. And we need to respect it as part of us. So as we move forward, God damn it, people, vote. And wear a goddamn mask.
All right.
You know, all of those things you hear all the time. God dang it.
Well, that might be a good note to wrap up on. Allison?
Yeah, well, and thank you to James. I'm a relative newcomer to Washington and was thinking how much I look forward to coming and visiting the Duwamish River and doing some sightseeing. So thanks for that tip and all the other tips. And thank you to PJ for organizing this session. And I thoroughly enjoyed hearing from James and Jonathan and Paulina. So thanks for gathering today. Again, this session has been recorded. And that link to view that recording will be shared with all of the attendees and our panelists. So you can view that again at some later date. With that, I'll wish you all a lovely afternoon and thank you again.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Jonathan, James, Paulina. It's great to spend this time with you all.